Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with an intergalactic obliteration of the cosmic fine-tuning argument. In this video, we're going to be looking at Plantinga's elaborate poker equivocation, where we're going to be talking about some of the big problems with Plantinga's poker response to the multiverse objection to the original cosmic fine-tuning argument. We're going to show how there's a huge equivocation between a poker game and the universe. So, we ended our last video saying that because we have multiple throws of the dice, but we're lucky on multiple property lotteries, we're still allowed to infer design, even though we still have multiple chances to make our very high probabilities from the original cosmic fine-tuning argument. However, Alvin, the equivocator, Plantinga's poker game is going to strike a false comparison between a poker game and the constants of the universe for several reasons that we're going to go into in this video. After that, we're going to take a look at Schlesinger and the lottery and some problems with that argument as well. So first off, it commits the Monty Hall fallacy, as it assumes that the processes of the universe creation are random, when in fact they could be determined by some rules. Second, it assumes that there already exists some intelligence, namely the dealer, that's able to affect the events of the game. The existence of such an intelligence is exactly what is at question. Therefore, this clearly begs the question. Third, it is offered as a logically closed disjunction, where the only two possibilities are chance or design. There's no way for us to show that those are the only two possibilities for the universe, possibly not even for the poker game. Fourth, the situation forces a choice. You can either keep playing or stop, when epistemically you always have the option of suspending judgment and taking neither option, or taking more time, investigating further, looking into what is actually causing it instead of making an assumption based on bad or incomplete information. Fifth, the game fails to note that in all the universes where the dealer isn't winning the game, either by chance or design, we wouldn't be there to decide. The dealer has to be winning the game for us to exist. Additionally, the argument is going to be completely ineffective against the modal realist. As noted before, the actual world is simply an indexical. So, the response that Plantinga offers isn't going to work if you're a modal realist. The multiverse objection, or just the fact that you're a modal realist, is going to hold out. As for the lottery argument, this exploits the contradictory intuition which in fact gives rise to the lottery paradox. Once we discard this problematic intuition, Schlesinger's distinction is going to disappear. And we're going to show that it's a distinction without an actual difference. Furthermore, it's clear to see once we look into Schlesinger's argument a little more in depth that he's just trying to hide the fact that he's sanctioning us using a logical fallacy. And the only way we could conclude his conclusion is to assume that very logical fallacy. Once again, once we dispense with this logical fallacy, there's no reason for us to follow his argument. Alright, let's get started. So, imagine that there were a way of shuffling the cards that made it more likely to put the aces in the dealer's hand. Now imagine that without realizing it, the dealer is using that technique, perhaps by always putting his good hand in such a position that it will get dealt to him again. Or maybe he's using a shuffling machine that has some kind of glitch that causes his hand to get placed back into the deck in such a way that he'll keep getting it over and over again. In this way, the dealer will continue to have a very high chance of dealing himself a very good hand, but not be in any way consciously designing his hands. The consciousness and the design need not enter into it, such that there is a way that he's beating the odds, as it were. Sure, the dealer's still cheating, but he's not doing it by design, and no intelligence is required in order for him to do it. And it's not hard to imagine a similar scenario with the universe. Imagine that the laws of the universe are constructed in such a way as to make the constants that allow for life more likely. If there was some process that made this case more likely, then we can cheat the odds without an intelligence cheating for us. Now, note that I'm not arguing here that there is such a process. I'm saying that there's no argument against it, so it should be at least one of the options we're considering. We can't know whether or not a process like that exists, but presupposing that it doesn't is an argument from ignorance. The problem is not that they don't give an argument for or against this. The problem is that they don't include it in their list of possibilities. You would need to argue against it in order to conclude that design is correct. Simply because a process seems random doesn't mean that it is. We have yet to find a natural process that is truly random and doesn't follow any kind of rules. So there's no reason to think that universe generation would break this pattern. If nothing is in fact random, then in fact it is the case that the constants were arrived at not by random chance, but by a set of rules. And if we're going to hold to the principle of sufficient reason, nothing can be random in that way. It has to have a sufficient reason. It has to have a cause for it happening. Whether or not you believe in the principle of sufficient reason is up to you. But those of you that do hold that principle should clearly see that there must be some reason for the constants of the universe. This seems to mean that we should throw out chance altogether and simply look to rules versus design, neither of which have significantly more likely situations. So, in the poker game, we presuppose that there is an intelligence behind the cards being dealt. If we get rid of this assumption, the conclusion is going to become much less intuitive. Take the following thought experiment. So imagine you are playing poker against your computer this time. If your computer started dealing itself only hands with aces and wild cards, would you conclude, 1, that your computer has suddenly gained consciousness and is cheating to cheat you and to win, or that there's a bug in the program such that the process is no longer random? What seems more likely? Well, while it's possible that your computer just suddenly gained consciousness and is trying to cheat you, it seems much more likely that there's some rule in its programming that caused it to do it. That the situation is determined, not designed. The only reason that we think the dealer is cheating is we already assume that he has consciousness. If we're dealing with something that we don't assume has consciousness, but arguably could gain consciousness, the result is we would assume much more often that there's some rule, some law, some determination behind the creation of those unlikely scenarios, as opposed to some design, consciousness, or intelligence doing it. Similarly, if we're not already assuming that there is some God that has consciousness, then there's no reason for us to guess that the constraints of the universe are designed instead of determined. To presuppose an intelligence is to beg the question. And yet, if we don't presuppose one, Plantinga's conclusion is as unlikely as your computer gaining intelligence and then cheating you at poker. If there are only two possibilities, and one is extremely unlikely, then the other must be very likely. We learn this from one of our basic rules of probability. The sum of the probabilities of S and not S is 1. So basically, if chance and design are our only options, then design appears very likely because chance is very unlikely. And yet there's no proof that design and chance are the only options. The universe is vast and complicated. There's no way to show that there's not some other option. This is clearly not a sufficiently wide field we're looking at. To assume that such a list is exhaustive is going to be quite problematic because you're assuming it without any justification or argument for it. And in fact, this video has already offered a few possible alternatives to just chance and design, namely a set of rules or laws or just a logical necessity that causes these constants to come into place. There's no reason for us to assume that design and chance are the only options. Therefore, we're unjustified in putting forward that disjunction. To assume that the only possibilities are chance and design is to commit the fallacy of false dichotomy. Now, so in the poker game, you cannot choose to wait for more information or to analyze what the dealer was doing to see if he was cheating. Because in Plantinga's example, you jump up and you accuse the dealer, and your only choices are, can you keep playing or not? But if, for example, there was a video of his shuffling that proved either that he was or was not cheating, we wouldn't even need to have this argument because we would have proof one way or the other. In fact, we wouldn't wait to jump up on him until we had some proof that he was cheating, right? Like finding an ace up his sleeve. If it seemed that he was cheating, it seems that you would wait for more evidence beyond just him being very lucky, because there is the chance that he was just very lucky. However, if you see cards dropping out of his sleeves, or you see him slipping cards off the top of the deck, or acting in such a way that makes it clear that he's cheating, then then you would be allowed to make that inference. But before that point, you're just making a guess based on bad or not enough evidence. The reason that this is really problematic is Plantinga's kind of slipped in this necessity of urgency into his thought experiment that doesn't exist for the universe. Because we might lose more money in the poker game by suspending judgment on whether the dealer was cheating or not. You might keep losing money by paying into this guy who keeps just having aces and wild cards in his hand. Yet we lose nothing, of course, in searching for reasons that the constants are what they are, be that determined rules, chance, or design, and just suspending judgment on that truth. It seems that the most logical thing to do here is not to jump to either conclusion based on incomplete evidence. It's to wait until more evidence shows itself. Wait until we have more information on the situation. Plantinga's thought experiment forces us to choose from bad options, when in fact there's not enough information to honestly pick between any of them. Now, yet another difference between the poker game and the multiverse theory is that the poker game example, we're thinking of hundreds of universes in which we're all playing poker, and only one in which the dealer has amazing hands. Whenever I think of this example, I imagine myself and my counterparts in all these universes, and we're all playing poker. And in all but one of the universes, in 999,999 universes, the dealer isn't getting good hands, and all the cards are just being dealt randomly. And in one place, the dealer is actually honestly getting the good hands through chance. Now, what's more likely? That in most of those universes the dealer is cheating to get those good hands, or that I'm that 1 out of a million place where the dealer's honestly getting the good hands? It seems clear that the more likely event in that situation is that I'm in the situation where the dealer's designed it in such a way, not I'm the 1 out of 1 million where the dealer's getting the good hands honestly. Yet, in the universe example, we don't exist in any of the other universes. We can't picture those 999,999 others of us that are playing the poker game honestly. In fact, the whole point is that we only exist in this one. The better argument for the dealer to offer when you confront him about cheating is that in all worlds in which life exists, he must get these good hands. And in fact, if we're to believe the fine-tuning argument, this must be true. If this is true, the question is, what caused what? Is it more likely that the dealer planned to cheat in such a way that he caused life to exist? Or did life already exist and that caused the dealer to find these hands dealt to him? What is the cause and what's the effect? Now, this may seem a little too much for a dealer to do, but that's actually the problem, because you would need a god to do such a thing. Basically, think of it this way. There's no universe in which someone discovered some constant that proves no life exists. The fact that we could discover any constant presupposes that life exists. We have to be here to play the poker game. And once we're here to play the poker game, the dealer has to have those good hands. If he didn't have those good hands, we wouldn't be around to play the poker game. The point is, we can't imagine millions of poker games in which the dealer gets his cards by accident, and only 1 in a million that he's getting these good hands by chance. Instead, we must imagine only one world where we are playing the poker game, and millions with no life. He could still be cheating, but he would have to have created the universe to do so. The dealer would have to be God to cheat. Once again, this begs the question, as the experiment presupposes the existence of the dealer that can make cards fall in such a way as to create life. Simply by saying that there is a dealer, Plantinga has presupposed God. The reason that begging a question in such a way is a problem is that those of us who don't already accept that God exists will have no reason to accept that first premise of his argument. So in summary, Plantinga's argument commits many different fallacies in a lot of different ways. He begs the question by assuming that God exists in order to prove his argument. He equivocates between a poker game and the probabilities of the universe. He creates a false dichotomy between chance and design. And he commits the Monty Hall fallacy by claiming that something must be based on chance or probability when in fact it might be based on rules or determination as opposed to design. The poker game and the universe are too different to be compared. There's no reason to suspect that there is not another option other than chance and design. In other words, Plantinga's argument is going to fail to break down the multiverse objection to the cosmic fine-tuning argument, and therefore the multiverse objection is still going to be a valid objection to that argument. Now, the last objection that we just looked at is going to become even stronger for the modal realist. Remember our modal realist who believes that all possible worlds are real physical worlds, they actually exist, we just can't access them, and the actual world is just going to be an indexical, like I, here, or now. For anyone in a different possible world, their actual world is just the world that they're in. For them, there exists a world with every possible iteration of the cosmic constants. So it makes sense to say that the one that we're in is the one that people are in, of course. It's not just likely, it's logically necessary. For them, there is in fact a world in which God created everything. But there's also a world where the constants were arrived at randomly, because that's a logical possibility as well. And another world where they were determined by the rules of that world. Now, if those different worlds seem to be the same, then we have something of the duplication argument, and you can't tell which one you're in, but there's no argument to show that it's more likely you're in one world than another. So, for the modal realist, you don't even have to worry about this argument to begin with. Now, on to Schlesinger and the lottery. So, the problem here is that when we think of a 1 in a billion lottery, there are two different kinds of lotteries we could imagine. One in which 1 billion people put their names into a hat and one must be pulled. And another in which one person tries in one chance to guess a single number under 1 billion. The problem is, in the first case there has to be a winner, in the second there doesn't. So the actual intuitive difference that Schlesinger is identifying in his thought experiment is just that. The reason that we think that winning a 1 in 1 billion lottery is more likely is we think that there has to be someone that wins it. Someone's name has to be on that piece of paper that's drawn. While if there were 1,000 names in each of 3 lotteries, there's no guarantee that one person is going to win all 3. In fact, it's very unlikely that the same person would win all 3. So to make this more obvious, think of the actual case that we have to be talking about, in which one person is trying to guess 3 numbers under 1,000, and one person is trying to guess one number under 1 billion correctly. If we don't assume that there must be a winner in any of these cases, it should be clear that these are equal likelihoods, because in the first case, you're guessing 9 digits, all 0 through 10, and in the second case, you're guessing 9 digits, all 0 through 10. The point is, these likelihoods are the same, and we can see that clearly when we don't think of it as one person's name being pulled out of a hat where there must be a winner, but rather someone guessing a number. If that was too complicated, think of it like this. We can see this clearly when we think about a scenario that doesn't have such an ambiguity and works with more manageable probabilities. What's more likely, rolling 2 10s on 2 10-sided dice, or 100 on a 100-sided die? Yes, they exist. They look like golf balls. If your intuition is that they are the same likelihood, and that it's not more likely that you cheated when you rolled the die twice, then Schlesinger's argument is defeated. Now, even if this is not your intuition, there's a deeper problem with Schlesinger's argument. Namely, that he claims that if we see a series of unlikely events, we are justified in concluding that something designed them. Yet this is just clearly an example of something known as the Bud Light fallacy. So as human beings, we often see a correlation between two events and infer a causation, even though none is present. If you've taken any statistics class, you should understand that correlation doesn't imply causation. This is known as the fallacy of false cause, or more specifically, post hoc ergo propter hoc, also known as the Bud Light fallacy, after the Bud Light commercials in which someone does something ridiculous to cause their sports team to win a game, and then thinks that they need to keep doing that ridiculous thing in order to keep their sports team winning. All that Schlesinger has done is claim that we are allowed to commit this fallacy. Because why not? In this case, because our intuition tells us that multiple events are less likely than one unlikely event, when the math tells us that the probabilities are actually the same. We have intuitions that fight against the logic, and Schlesinger says, forget the logic, let's just go with our intuition. Let's go with our gut. The problem is, the reason that we have logical fallacies in the first place is to show that our intuitions are often wrong and unsupported by logic. Someone might bully you into accepting a conclusion. The point of having a logical fallacy around that is to show that just because you accepted that conclusion and your intuition was to do that, doesn't mean that it was logically valid or justified. Schlesinger admits that this intuition is not supported by the math, yet claims it's justified because he feels it should be, because he has that gut feeling that it could be justified, because he has that natural human intuition to see causation in correlation, which doesn't actually logically exist. Such an argument is worse than fallacious. It allows for fallacious reasoning to enter into all aspects of our logic. It allows gut feeling to trump logic. It is simply and basically irrational. So, just as Plantinga's argument rested on fallacies, all Schlesinger's argument does is attempt to bring a fallacy into our natural use of logic. It's problematic, it's irrational, and it was just debunked. So, that was the elaborate poker equivocation. Next up, we're going to be looking at how the original cosmic fine-tuning argument commits the Monty Hall fallacy in a number of different ways. Then we'll talk about the life as we know it objection, followed by a number of other videos. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.